Welcome to another episode of Uncomfortable Conversations with the Black Man. In today's climate, in today's culture, it's been said that police have been given a license to kill, physically. Well, some would submit that comedians have been given a license to kill, not physically, but emotionally. Well, I'm privileged to be joined by bestseller, host, and comedian Chelsea Handler. How are you, Chelsea?
I'm very happy to meet you.
The pleasure is all mine. Chelsea, I've watched your social media, I've seen your specials, seen your books, and you said that political correctness is the handicap of any real conversation. I found that interesting. Political
correctness is a handicap in having an honest conversation, okay. I think. But it should be applied to certain situations like racism, like sexism. I think we're in a period now, I would say, of overcorrectness because we got so carried away that we have to overcorrect to meet in the middle of the place where we should have always been or we should aspire to go to. Political correctness, when you're having a real conversation with a real person and you're trying to get to the heart or the matter of an issue, I think you can toss it out the window and say, hey, I'm going to ask some questions that might not be politically correct, but I'm looking for real honest answers. I want to grow as a person and I want to know better and do better.
Yeah. Well, then let's get very politically incorrect.
I think it's politically incorrect.
Thank you for your correction. As a black man, is it my job to not be offended? Or as the white comedian, is it your job not to be offensive?
I would say it's my job to not be offensive. I don't think you could ever ask somebody to not be offended. You know, something I talk about in my special was when I was filming my documentary for Netflix called Hello Privilege. It's me, Chelsea. I had an interaction with a woman on the first day of on set, and she had sang the song, this black woman, and I went up and hugged her and was like, great job, you know, like in the spirit of sisterhood. I thought, I was like, yeah, great job, and then I smacked her on the ass.
Uh-oh.
And that was not.
That didn't fly?
That was not kosher. And I got a call from Netflix, then they told me I had to go to sexual harassment training, which I had already done. And I was like, I can't believe I have to repeat that class.
Wait, why had you already gone to sexual? We can't just skate by that.
Well, I mean, I just have always had to go to sexual harassment training wherever I work because, you know, I'm inappropriate. And, you know, for a long time that was okay, but we're in a climate now where nothing's okay. You know, you can't do anything, and it's a good lesson. And for me, you know, when they said I had to call this woman, she was really offended, and I was like, I don't understand what is it? What about it is sexual harassment? I'm straight. And when I called her, and I was defensive because I was like, she's overreacting. She's making something out of nothing. And she sat and explained to me, like, you don't have any right to touch me. You're not my girlfriend or my sister or my friend. Like, I've never met you before. And she said to me, black women have been defined by their hair and their asses since the beginning of time, and you have no idea what I've been through, and you have no right to touch my body. And she was right. And she explained to me that it's not about my intention, which was innocent, it's about her reception.
You have very publicly said, white privilege exists. I'm a beneficiary of white privilege. When did you realize white privilege exists?
Through therapy, you know, it gave me the gift of self-awareness. And we talked a lot about, you know, where I was so exhausted from everything. Everything was a bother, everything was an annoyance. And there was this sense of entitlement and the realization that I was exactly an elitist. This word that I kept hearing that I couldn't stand. It was like, oh, wait. I went from New Jersey, from my white neighborhood in New Jersey, and moved straight to California, where I lived in Brentwood. Then I lived in Santa Monica, and now I live in Bel Air. Like, I am an elitist because I wanted to become one. Yeah. That's exactly what I was trying to do. I got rewarded for my bad behavior repeatedly. My first book was called My Horizontal Life, a collection of one-night stands. You know, when I started to look outside of myself and get my own head out of my own ass, I was able to go, wait a second, this isn't the experience that everybody's having. Look around. No black girl was going to get away with what I got away with on that TV show, on Chelsea Lately. On calling people out, going off on people, joking about drinking and sleeping around and doing drugs, you know, things I take a lot of pride in. But black girls weren't going to be able to, you know, I started to think about those things. I always grew up knowing that if I called the police, they were going to protect me. They were. You know, I never thought what it would be like to be a black woman in trouble and think twice about calling the police. I'm the beneficiary of a ton of privilege.
But you didn't grow up with money, because so many people would counter that, well, I didn't grow up with money, my parents had to work hard, I am not privileged.
Right.
What would you say to that?
I would say that I was under that impression too. I thought white privilege meant the Rockefellers, or the Bush family, or you had a legacy family that goes to Harvard or Yale or Stanford. Like, I thought it was the rich and the best, the top 1%. I didn't understand how granular it is. Just the advantage of going into a grocery store. If I want to take some candy and eat it while I'm walking down the aisle, not going to be a problem. No one's going to say anything to me, and I have the confidence that I do it all the time. Like, I started to think about the variations of what it means when I get pulled over by a police officer versus you getting pulled over by a police officer. I've gone off on police officers when they've pulled me over, telling them like they have no right. Like, this was before I was famous, just living in New Jersey, I'd be like, you can't give me a ticket. You don't know who my father is. Meanwhile, my father was a used car dealer. I didn't even know what I was talking about. My father couldn't do anything. But I just had such entitlement because I'd grown up as a product of my own culture. White privilege doesn't mean you don't work hard, or that you're not working multiple jobs, or that you haven't had an easy life, or that you've only had an easy life, or however you want to frame it. So as long as you are part of the system, you are and participating in the system and not trying to dismantle the system, then you are participating in racism, in a racist society, because that's what we are living in.
I was watching one of your specials, and you were talking to a group of women in Orange County, and you asked them if white privilege exists, and one answer intrigued me the most. The woman said, white privilege doesn't exist, but maybe black disprivilege exists. That raised an eyebrow of mine, but I ask you, why is it so hard for white people to admit, some white people, to admit that white privilege exists?
Because then they're guilty of something. My sister-in-law is upset that my nephew didn't get into the college of his choice. When he worked his ass off, he got great grades, he did it all. And she's like, it's just too much affirmative action. There's, everyone's taking these spots. And I was like, no, he wasn't good enough. This is what is supposed to be happening. You can't be anti-affirmative action when you're only thinking about your nuclear family. You're not thinking about the world. Are you only thinking about your family? That's where we all get off on the wrong foot. I mean, I can speak freely about that because I don't have any children, so I don't have to give a shit about that. But like, the selfishness and the self-absorption of only thinking about how it's going to affect you and your children getting an advantage. Like, my nephew's going to be fine. He's going to go to college. He's going to do great. He's going to get a great job. And so I was texting with him yesterday. I said, I sent your mother a book called Caste. I said, I need you to read it, and I want to talk about this book with you so that you have a real understanding. The book is so powerful. She talks about, how the Nazis modeled the Holocaust after the American South. Mm-hmm. They looked at our southern states during Jim Crow and said, how do they separate, how do they suppress an entire population of people by, separate swimming pools and separate water fountains and segregation? And the Nazis looked at that model. That is all you need to know about the history of this country to know that this is completely fucked up. How would you know about racism when you grew up in a white family and you go to a school with white kids and you don't have any black friends or Chinese friends or Muslim friends? How the fuck would you possibly know how racism is doing in this country? What a naive thing to say. And he sends me an emoji with the arms up, like, okay, don't yell at me. And I was like, no, but be mindful and think about what you're saying. Let me give you an example of a very white privileged friend of mine, okay? All of my friends are pretty privileged. But I went over to her house one day, a few weeks ago, and she said, oh God, did you hear about all the black people who were cashing their stimulus checks early and going to Barney's in Beverly Hills and buying clothes? And there were 4 of us. And I said, stop right there. Just stop what you're saying. And she goes, what? I mean, they're all using their stimulus. I go, you're perpetuating a stereotype that you know nothing about. What's the point of that story? What is the point of you perpetuating a stereotype about black people not being able to handle their money? Why are you doing that? And she goes, well, don't jump down my throat. I go, I'm not. I just want you to know that it's all negative what you're doing right now. And we're not in a time where we need. And she goes, well, how else am I supposed to tell that story if I don't say that they're black people? And I said, you don't tell the story. You stop telling the story. It's none of your business. And I think, those conversations between white people are really important for white people not to think that that's their safe space to bitch about what's happening.
Let me chime in, because so many people ask me, Emmanuel, what is the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist? And I'm not going to sit here and try to play your defense card or say that Chelsea Handler is perfect, but that is the example that I would give. Is it's not being non-racist is still tolerating racism, but not volunteering yourself as a racist. Being anti-racist is speaking out against racism whenever you see it. And I do think we need more of that. What's your advice to those who don't know what to say to their loved ones when they want to call out racism or have tough conversations?
You know, I mean, I like historical, I like to talk about historical facts, like actual data. I like to remind people that when slavery was abolished for the first time, how slave owners were given reparations rather than the slaves themselves. That's a great conversation starter. To reward the white people who held the slaves and beat them and used them, and we built this country and the economy of this country on the backs of black people, to actually start with those conversations, to say, you understand how uneven things are, that even when we released the slaves, we didn't give them any tools to succeed. We kept them down and oppressed them over and over and over again. So it's like stark facts like that about just giving reparations to landowners makes people's eyes open. I like to just talk about facts because I think that, when you're talking to anybody of real intelligence, that's a good place to start.
If Chelsea Handler were a black woman, would she be where she is today?
Great question. Great question. The old me would have been like, yeah, and now I'm probably not. I hope so, but probably not.
You mentioned white women, so let's talk about Karens. Karen, the code word for the white woman who chooses to weaponize her whiteness. What do you feel when you see the viral videos of Karens going into Trader Joe's or walking their dog without a leash and calling the police on a black man? What do you feel when you see white women weaponizing their whiteness?
Vitriol. I see it. And when I see white women living out that anger, like being a product of your culture is not always your fault, but not examining that further as you age and grow up is your fault. I have a lot of friends who I don't think are racist at all, but there's an inured culturalism within us that when you see three black men across the street, white women are taught to think danger.
Have you ever weaponized your whiteness or thought about it?
I'm sure I have, unconsciously, tons of times. I mean, I can't say tons of times because I can't think of a specific time, but I would never pretend that I'm not guilty of being exactly the type of person that I would be embarrassed to be, When
people are gonna watch this and say, well, she wrote a book called You Got to Be Kidding Me, and she's done so many racist things, and I'm just not going to forgive Chelsea Handler. She's a racist, always a racist in my book. She's just putting on a show now so people can like her. What would you say to those people?
Well, I mean, I've never had to put on a show to make any, I'm not trying to win a popularity contest. I think I've made that pretty clear, that I stand up for what I believe in, that I tell the truth, and that I'm not pandering. I'm not pandering, I'm not a faker. I can't even pretend to be in a good mood when I'm not in a good mood, You can see people change and evolve. And that's the thing with this culture that we're in, this cancel culture that we're talking about. It's like people are capable of changing. People are capable of changing. Everyone deserves to be forgiven as long as they are truly, sorry for what they did.
I hate cancel culture because cancel culture doesn't give anyone the opportunity to grow, to morph, to evolve. If you cancel them, then they will just continue in their error, continue in their blunder. So I think cancel culture is one of the biggest issues we have in our society. Lastly, I would have to ask, what would you say in your mind is the solution to mend the fracture in this country?
We need a lot of legislation. We need a lot of legislation, and we need a lot of a deep dive into our education system. Equality isn't a zero-sum game. You don't have to lose something to make other people equal. You don't have to give anything up. In fact, it's a celebration for us all because it's been proven over and over again scientifically with data that when people succeed, and minorities succeed, and women succeed, we all do better.
Yeah, they say a rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah, there you go. I like that.
Well, Chelsea, thank you so much.
Oh, what a pleasure. So nice talking to you.
Likewise. And thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Remember, words have power to heal, but words also have power to kill. So choose wisely. We'll see you next time.